Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Luke Sacco. I've had some interesting videos over the past couple weeks about the Phantom Nightmare format that's coming up. I've got a couple more combo videos that are coming up. I've got a Labyrinth one coming up later this week. Today, I'm coming in with a meta tier list. I know a lot of other YouTubers have been doing similar things, but I just want to give my personal take on it. So let's go ahead and hop into that. The first deck here is to represent the pure Snake Eye build, the one I showed off on the channel, with Jet Synchron, things like that. I think this deck has a very, very solid chance at doing well in the next format, and thus I'll put it in tier 1. I think the decks that are going to end up being in tier 1 are decks that have a lot of room for non-engine and can also utilize the Snake Eye package. These cards are so broken, just inherently. They're so plus. A lot of things like that. They give them a very good lead over other decks in the format. Next deck is Branded, and I'm going to use this one to represent the Branded deck that does not use Puppet, Gimmick Puppet to skip turns. So this one is going to be like the pure Branded board that actually has like an inboard to it. I'm going to put this one down in tier 3. I think this deck is not great. The OCG like to capitalize on this using the Shaddoll Fusion to go into App Cologne, just because it trades with so many different things. My take on it is there's a very interesting combo and a way to go about playing the deck, but I think it's just simply worse than the Gimmick Puppet build. The Gimmick Puppet build has a better chance based on if people are on board breakers or not, and if people are on hand traps. And especially for things like Effect Veiler and Imperm and the Biru, cards that a lot of people are on, this deck can play through those very, very flawlessly to still resolve the Puppet Lock, and if this card gets put on your opponent's field, the game should end. There should be no recovery once this card touches ground. It's over. Cyber Dragon. Centurion. Okay, Centurion, we're gonna go ahead and put this in tier 3. Centurion is okay. It does have a lot of room for non-engine. It can play 18 hand traps. The problem with Centurion is that it's not good. That's just simply what it is. The deck is not strong enough. It has the ability to turn skip people, but it's so fragile. Any form of hand trap in the deck pretty much gets stopped. There's not that many extenders, not to mention just getting Bonfire to add consistently doesn't do enough for the deck. So I'd put it down in tier 3 still. Chimera Branded. I'm going to stick this down in tier 3 as well. This deck doesn't do anything special like it used to. It's just there. This is the entry level deck. If you want to introduce your friend to playing Yu-Gi-Oh, you stick them on Chimera. They can win 2 out of 5 games at locals, right? 2 out of 5 matches. Then they'll be happy with it. But this deck is not great. Do not play this deck on a competitive level. Next deck is Dragon Link. I think Dragon Link has a very interesting approach to this next format because there's no lights or darks in the graveyard besides Diabell Star. And taking a Diabell Star to the graveyard isn't as good as taking it out in like things like Rescue Ace, because they still have Snake Eyes cards they can target with their original to get back on follow-up. This deck has a very high ceiling. It can play a lot of non-engine, and this deck has really good matchups into random things in the format, like Voiceless Voice, Labyrinth, things like that. I'm gonna stick this in like a low tier 2, just because I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's the best choice. The next deck is Salamangreat. This deck is in a really weird position because we don't really know if we're getting Code of Soul in the next set in the Phantom Nightmare set. I'll throw it somewhere up on the screen here. But Salamangreat has some really interesting combos once that card comes out, and I think that it could be a very, very good tier 2 contender if that card comes out. But without the card coming out, it's kind of just a weaker inboard. It's got like a Promethean Pop, a counter trap. That's pretty much it. It has a really tough time dying, but the deck just doesn't do enough. So I'm going to stick it in like a tier 3 for now. Still better than like regular Branded, Chimera, Centurion, but unless Code of Soul comes out, this deck is sitting down here. If Code of Soul does come out, I'd put the deck up here just because the deck has a higher ceiling, and it has the ability to search Ash Blossom from deck using a Fire Fist card, which I'll throw up on screen right now. It summons a level 3 Fire from deck, and then you just Sunlight Wolf, add it back to hand. But with that in the format, if Code of Soul does come out, that gives you really good matchups like Labyrinth and Branded that it just kicks out of the format, because if it goes first searching Ash Blossom, that's just game. Next up is Rescue Ace. My favorite deck for the last format. I've played this deck for almost 6 months now. It's definitely a tier 1 contender. My only grievance with this deck next format is it feels like you look at your hand, and every time you look at your hand, you go, dang, I lose to this one hand trap. And it's just not a good feeling knowing that you're hoping and praying that they don't have that one specific hand trap that stops your hand. Another good thing about Rescue Ace is it does have some added consistency, utilizing Bonfire and Populous, as well as having some good recovery options. Using Bonfire on turn 3 to add Populous, summon, Populous, add original, link away the populous to put like a preventer in your spell trap zone, and then you can use original to send the preventer to graveyard. I mean, you get to summon a hydrant from deck, you get to trigger the preventer, summon a banished guy. It's a lot of follow-up. I think that adds a little bit of ceiling and power to the deck. Not to mention, if you do go for the situation where you have a Little Knight and a Turbulence on the field, I'll throw up like a little example screen of that. But and they imperm your Turbulence on summon, all you have to do is just link those guys into a Promethean. Promethean revive Turbulence, and boom, you can set 4 again. So this deck definitely got a little better. The problem with it is really just how it plays through hand traps, though. Next deck is Fire King, the best deck of the format. I've tried to avoid playing this deck. I've tested every other possibility. It's not close. It really isn't. Like, there is a pretty good distance between these two decks and Fire King for which one is the best deck. Fire King plays some cards that aren't necessarily the best. However, they manage to be so good in some situations that it just leaps past every other deck. Not to mention, the deck has multiple different ways of being played. You can play board breakers, you can play hand traps, and they can play a lot of them. Like, the build that I've been looking at currently plays board breakers, but I've also seen builds that play 14 hand traps and like 3 talents. That's insane. Next deck is Labyrinth. I put this deck as like a high tier 2. My only problem with Labyrinth is that into the Fire King matchup specifically, if you go second, you lose. It's that's it. They either brick or they lose to your Ash Blossom, 1 hand trap, or you lose the game instantly. That's what it is. Once they've established a board, there's nothing you can possibly do to come back. But Labyrinth has some neat combos that gets it into the grind game if it goes first. Usually, if the deck goes first at this point in time, it's over. The game just is not winnable from that point. Labyrinth has such a far lead and advantage. It's crazy. Now we're talking about Voiceless Voice. This is a deck I've been testing quite a bit in my spare time. I think this deck is interesting, has a bunch of different situations where it can be better than the other decks. Specifically, one interaction that I really like with the Voiceless Voice deck is enemy controller with Diviner. So like normal summon Diviner into a board, Diviner effect. Whether it gets hit with an imperm or not, you can chain enemy controller to tribute your Diviner and take their monster. And then you can do Chainlink 1 Diviner's effect to summon from the deck because it was tributed because of enemy controller. Chainlink 2 Intis, which is the card you ended up sending off of the Diviner, to go ahead and target a card and pop it. And that's like 4 cards in advantage right there. You traded for 2, you stole their monster, you're getting a pop and you're summoning from deck. That's a really good leave and advantage. The thing I don't like about this deck is, since it has hard negates and not really good to like board removal, it is kind of hard to clear boards, especially when things are like resolving to summon more cards on your turn. So if they IP with a Flame Burge and they summon 2 monsters from graveyard, it's really hard to clear all those random bodies. So because of that, I'm going to stick the deck in like a tier 2 position here. The deck can play a lot of non-engine. It also has very good situations where it can play around draw, which I like. Mannadium, that's a really interesting deck for next format. One thing I like about Mannadium is that with Typhon being out of the format, Mannadium gets a little better. With the current boards, it feels like your opponent normal summons a monster, makes a Typhon, attacks your Appo, bounces your guy, and passes with 2 hand traps and the game ends. Like, that's one thing I really dislike about Mannadium currently, but people are starting to move Typhon out of their deck with the new 2024 February format because of Phantom Nightmare. Anytime you make a Typhon, people just pop it with the Promethean Princess. It doesn't really matter too much. One thing that is really good about this deck, though, is that it has a strong matchup into things like the Voiceless Voice deck because it plays through like hard negations pretty well. As long as it can put a monster on field, you should be good. So I'm going to put this deck at like a tier 2, like a low tier 2. Not too good. Orcust, or like an Orcust pile deck. I think this deck is really copium, not very good. People play it because they're nostalgic for the cards, but these cards are not good. I'm going to put Pearly in a tier 3 position just because it's really not that hard to out a Noir in the next format, especially if you're playing Fire King. Being able to like pop their field spell, summon a Garunix from deck, or add a Garunix summon from hand, pop a Kieran from deck, puts it at 3,900. That is plenty big to punch over there, the Noir. It's really not hard to out it. Not to mention, there are things like talents and a lot of hand traps in the format, and Pearly is really weak into hand traps in some hands. Next deck is Vanquish Soul. I think this deck is terrible. Like, it's on Chimera level of easy to play, and the deck's like has consistency issues, and I really wouldn't play a deck like that has such a low ceiling just for the fact that it's easy to play. Rhino Heart, or Tier Limit in general. I think this deck is kind of on the same page as like Pearly of it's not great. One thing I do like about this is the Fire King has a lot of removal in its inboard, and tier limit is really good at not getting destroyed by things like that and having recoverable inboards. Next up you have Fur Hire, or specifically Runic Fur Hire, I guess. This deck does get a little bit better in the next format because of a card called Back Mutation. It'll be somewhere once again. This card lets you summon Rex from deck or Sprite Blue, has added consistency, added lines of diversion. The only thing I dislike about this deck is that the Runic cards have a very bad matchup into Fire King, and with Fire King being the best deck, that's something you're going to have to expect that is going to go wrong from now and then. I do like the fact that there are some funny lines in Fur Hire that can make Dweller, but they're not worth playing. Truly, they're not worth playing. You should just play this deck based on its disruptions that it can create. Another thing that's important to know for the Fur Hire deck is that Fogo just says it's destroyed. It doesn't have to be by your card effects. So if they go like activate Island effect and they destroy a monster they control, you can actually trigger Fogo to draw 3. That's something that also came up in the Unchained matchup. Next up we have Floowandereeze. This is a deck that I think actually got a pretty big boost of support with a new card called Swallow's Cowrie that comes out in the next set as a TCG exclusive. It's basically like your 4th, 5th, and 6th copy of Advent of Adventure. Helps you play through hand traps really well. It even helps you add like a little bit of an inboard. There's a new thing you can do with a level 3 monster called something, I don't remember its name, it has a weird name. But it lets you add a wind monster from deck to your hand. So the average Floowandereeze inboard now is Droll, Longbird, Impen, and the Trap card, and that's pretty hard to play through in most matchups. Alright, next deck here is Sprite. One thing I like about Sprite, it can play Shifter. Shifter is an absolutely insane card. That's why Robina gets ranked so high, is because it can play Shifter. And all 3 of these decks here are not great into Shifter. Rescue Ace can only get to the set 4 in boss at that point if they open Emergency or Airlifter, which is not really that likely anymore because of the Airlifter hit. And Sprite, the board breaker version, also just got a big boost because you got more copies of Mind Control you can play, you got a Snatch Steal that can fit in your deck. But at the end of the day, it's still Sprite. The deck has a low ceiling and it's hard to play. I'm going to go ahead and stick heroes pretty quickly down in the side event tier. This deck sucks. You have to win the die roll and draw a Floodgate to like be playable and like have a good inboard. So, not something I would play in an event. This is meant to represent Runic Bestial. I just didn't want to create the double pictures, but Runic Bestial is what this deck is. I think this deck is in a worse spot than Runic Fur Hire, to be honest. I think this deck is like a tier 3 right now, just because the Runic Fur Hire deck has like a faster ceiling, it can climb up faster, but the Runic Bestial deck needs interaction points. It needs points where its Bestial can be good, it needs points where it can normal summon Quim and get free value pretty quickly, and that's just not something that's doable in this next format. Next deck, Kashtira. I like Kashtira a lot for this format, which is something I would never think I heard myself say. I used to hate Kashtira. I played this deck at one event, I topped with it, still didn't like the deck. My problem with Kashtira was a consistency thing, but now that you have 3 unicorns again, the deck is sitting at like 88-89% consistency. Still isn't fantastic, but that's enough. And the deck can play Shifter, so it's going to get free wins across these top 3 right here, which is definitely a good thing. And the last deck is Yama, or Unchained. I will say that I love my boy Aditya. He is the GOAT, but this deck is for side events. It's unplayable. It really is, and there's copium things you can do with like a Kashtira package to make Chirabini to combo. There's things you can do with some new guy that comes out of Phantom Nightmare to like almost make a combo. But really, this deck is just terrible, and there's nothing that can make it better at this point in time, unless Sharvara goes back to 3. But that was my tier list. This is my personal take on the format. I'm going to link my tier maker down below in the description, so if you guys want to check it out for yourself, mess with some things, and maybe even go over with your friends, people that you think that their opinions are worth listening to, and make one for yourself, you're more than welcome to do that. But I do really appreciate you listening to my content today, and thank you for liking and subscribing. Have a good day.